Extracting common factors, or more commonly known as just factoring. Now, in grade 9, we learned the distributive law, or multiplying polynomials. With this example, 4x times x minus 5, we are going to take the 4x and multiply it by both items inside the bracket. This will allow us to get rid of the bracket. So 4x times x is 4x squared. 4x times minus 5 is minus 20x. Now that's our polynomial. How do we factor? We basically go backwards and break it up into the parts that when multiplied would give us the original polynomial. So how do we wind up doing this? There are two ways we can do this. One, using algetiles, and the other using algebra. We're going to start with algetiles, and then I will show you a little bit about algebra. So first, let's identify what each of these shapes mean. Notice how I've taken x squared plus 2x and I've created a rectangle inside the crosshatch area. So first, a big square represents x squared. Why? Because its area is based on its side lengths. That means each side is equal to x. A bar is equal to x. Why? Because one side is x, the other side must be 1. And finally, a small square would be a 1. Now, look at the edges along the crosshatch. For x squared, on one edge, you have an x. Therefore, I'm going to have an x on the other side of the crosshatch. When we look above to get x squared, the other side, the upper edge, is also an x. Now, to find out what I multiply x by to get x inside the crosshatch, that would have to be a 1. So I look at the edge of the x that is near the top line, and I realize that that's a 1. I have two of them, therefore I'm going to have two 1s. So I now have identified my two factors. I've got that one, and I've got the upper one. So let's put these down using algebra. A bar is equal to x, and the upper one is x plus 2. If I multiplied these out, I should get my original polynomial. Now, how do I do this using algebra? Well, first thing I need to know is find my greatest common factor. How do I do this? Well, the more simple way of doing this is to break it down to its prime factors. X squared, well, what multiplies to give me x squared? That would be x times x. What multiplies to give me 2x? Well, that would be 2 times x. What do these two terms have in common? They both have an x. Therefore, my greatest common factor would be x. Now, to find the other factor, what I'm going to do is divide each term by the greatest common factor, and then we put our factors side by side. Later on, I will be teaching you about dividing. Let's do another example with algetiles. 2x squared plus 4x. Now, notice, again, I've created a rectangle. If we can't create a rectangle, it is not factorable. I'm now going to look at the two x's and look at their sides on the left-hand side along the crosshatch. What do I know? Well, to get x squared is going to be an x on one side, and I've got two of them, so that's two x's. Now, look above. What side of the edge above the x squared is going to be an x. Now, what side above the x bar? Well, that is a 1. Therefore, I'm going to have two 1s. So here are my two factors. I now put them together. On the left-hand side, I have two x's. From up above, I have x plus 2. If I multiply these together, I should get the original polynomial. Now, how do we do this using algebra? Well, 2x squared can be broken down to 2 times x times x. 4x, what multiplies to give me 4? That would be 2 times 2, and then I've got the x. So what do we have in common? We have a 2, and we have an x, giving us a greatest common factor of 2x. To find the other factor, again, I would divide by the greatest common factor. All right, one more example using algetiles. 2x minus 6. Again, notice I've distributed it in such a way that it forms a rectangle. So first, let's talk about the left-hand side. On the left-hand side, I have 2 x's where the long part is facing up. Therefore, my sides are going to be 2 1s. Up above, the long side, or x, is facing the upper part. Therefore, I'm going to have an x. Now, I've got to figure out what I multiply x by to get 1 by to get negative 1. And the answer is negative 1. Now, since I've got 3 of those, I'm going to have 3 negative 1s. So what are my factors now? Well, there's the left-hand side and what's above. So let's start with the left-hand side. Well, that is 2. And what's my other factor above? That's x minus 3. Now, it's very important that you put these together because you will lose marks if you don't. All right, let's talk algebra. 2x. Well, what multiplied to give me 2x? Well, that's simply 2x. Now, what multiplies to give me negative 6? Well, there's a problem here. Where does the negative go? Now, since I want a common factor, I'm going to have to put the negative on the 3 because my greatest common factor has to have the same sign as well. Therefore, my greatest common factor is 2. Now, how do I find the other term? Well, I'm going to take my original polynomial and divide it by my greatest common factor. But I've got a problem. I've got 2 items and I'm dividing it by 1 term. So how do I do this? I break it up into parts. 2x divided by 2 minus 6 divided by 2. 2x divided by 2 is x. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Finally, I'm going to put my terms together. My greatest common factor, and then the factor that I've factored out. All right, let's do this using algebra. Now, by the end, I'm hoping that you'll be able to do this without listing the greatest common factors, but it is a method that does work. So let's start with 2m to the 5th. What multiplies to give me 2m to the 5th? Well, there's only one thing that multiplies by 2, and that's 2. m to the 5th means I'm going to have 5 m's. 6m cubed. What multiplies to give me 6? Well, the 2 prime factors that multiply to give me 6 are 2 and 3, and followed by 3 m's. So what do we have in common? Well, they both have a 2, and they both have 3 m's. Therefore, 2 times m times m times m is 2m cubed. All right, now let's find the other factor. So what am I going to do? Divide both of these factors by my greatest common factor. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. M to the 5th divided by m cubed, we subtract the exponents, giving us m squared. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. M cubed divided by m cubed is 1, therefore I don't have to list it. Finally, I need to put my factors together. So my greatest common factor is 2m cubed, and my other factor that I've just found out by dividing is m squared minus 3. There's my final answer. All right, why don't you try the next one and I will do it in a minute. All right, this one is a little more complicated. Notice all of my terms are negative. That's important. So let's start with negative 4m cubed. Well, what multiplies to give me negative 4? The prime factors are 2 times 2. M cubed is 3m's. But there's a problem. It's negative 4, which means one of these 2's has to be negative. Since all of my terms are negative, I'm going to make the common term negative 2. So next, negative 6. Again, what multiplies to give me 6 would be 2 and 3. However, I want to have my common factor as negative, so I'm going to put the negative on the 2. Finally, negative 8 is made up of negative 2 times 2 times 2. So what do we have in common here? Well, my greatest common factor is negative 2. So I now need to find my other factor. So I'm going to divide each of these terms by -2. Since there's 3 terms, I have to break it up into 3 parts. Now, -4m cubed divided by -2. -4 divided by -2 is 2. Since I have no m's on the denominator, it's just going to be m cubed. -6 divided by -2 is going to be plus 3m squared. And finally, -8 divided by -2 is plus 4. At this point, I need to put my factors together. So my greatest common factor was -2. My other factor was 2m cubed plus 3m squared plus 4. Our final example. You'll notice that this looks considerably more difficult. And I have not given you any space for you to find the prime factors. We're going to try and do this without finding the prime factors. Let's break this up. Let's start with the numbers, 5, 15, and -10. Well, 2 of these terms are positive, so I'm going to make my greatest common factor a positive. So 5, 15, and 10, the biggest thing I can divide all 3 of those by is a 5. Next, look at the e's. I've got e squared, e cubed, and e fourth. Now notice, I can't take more than what any one of them has. So since my smallest number of e's is e squared, that's the most I can take out. Finally, y squared, and y. Well, the smallest number of y's is y to the 1. Therefore, that is the biggest thing I can take out. So my greatest common factor is 5e squared y. Now, I need to find my other factor. Well, how do I find my other factor? Well, I am going to divide each of these by 5e squared y. 5 divided by 5 is 1. E squared divided by e squared is 1. Y squared divided by y is y. 15 divided by 5 is 3. E cubed divided by e squared, I subtract my exponents to give me e. Y squared divided by y, I subtract my exponents to give me y. And finally, -10 divided by 5 is -2. E to the 4th divided by e squared is e squared. And finally, y divided by y is 1, which we don't need to put down. My final step is to put these all together. So my greatest common factor is 5e squared y. My other factor was y plus 3ey minus 2e squared. And that is my final answer. If I wanted to check this, I could multiply this out and it should give me the original polynomial.